recording, and I need to share a file with you guys, which I think I can do through the chat here on the Zoom. So let me try to do that. Okay. So there's a little tiny little Excel file in the chat. Does everybody, can people get that? Okay. So just go ahead and download that. That's what we're going to use to go through this. And now I'm going to share my screen.
Yeah.
Okay. Everybody can see my screen now. All right, cool. All right, so oh, one more thing. Does everybody have a way to log into Flourish? Because we're just going to do this together. I'm going to walk through it. So if you don't have an account, speak up and I'll get you one real quick. Okay. All right, looks like we're okay. All right. So so this tool is just awesome. Like I don't know why we have it. I think like it was like a Google sponsored thing or something that I got several years ago. But basically you can make all kinds of graphics with it. The possibilities are like really endless. So just like real quickly, just like a few that I've made. Here's one about U of L tuition and how it compared to inflation. This one is just about sales of the RAV4 hybrid. This one is one I made for Val's piece on Western Kentucky tornado disaster assistance and which counties had gotten the most. And what's great about these two is that they're interactive, so you hover over them and you get more information, right? So my feeling is like there's just absolutely no reason to ever use one of those very 2D TV looking charts that we would make for broadcast on the web, because we can do so much better with this tool. And anytime you have any story that has numbers, 2 or more, really, you can almost always figure out a way to use this. And it even has other applications. Like one more I want to show before we get started on the tutorial is this slider thing. So like here's what Lexington and Grinstead looks like now, and here's what it would look like if they built this big development, right? So that's a new one that I just started playing with. So they keep adding new templates all the time too. So so there's lots of new stuff to do. So a lot of possibilities. So so when you log in, is everybody able to log in? Let me know if there's any issues with that. Okay. There's two things you can do in Flourish, visualizations and stories. So we're going to worry about visualization. A story is what is like, it's almost like making a PowerPoint. Like you could take multiple visualizations and put them together. Like say you wanted to show 3 different charts in a series for some reason and put them all in the same place, like a photo gallery. That's what a story is. So a story is not something that we really need to worry about. Today, we are just going to recreate this very simple graphic and then go through the process of how to embed it into a web story on our site. So this is the real homicide data that I got from Carrie, and how it changed from 2018 to 2022. So when this is the most simple graphic that you can make in Flourish. It's just a column chart with one row of data. The first step is you hit new visualization. And the cool thing about the platform is that if you kind of have an idea of, well, it gives you examples of what kinds of graphics you can have. And so you have an idea of what data you have in your head, and you just look at these and think, well, what would fit best, right, with the data that I have? So I click on column chart here because we're just going to make a simple column chart. And you open this and it's like, okay, well, where did this data come from? Well, all of these templates that they have dummy data in them, because the idea is that they want you to be able to look at how this thing works so that you can then put your information into this same format so that it will take it and make the graphic that you want, right? So the dummy data is telling us that they just want, you know, a row that gives you the labels. I'm sorry, a column that gives you the labels, and then columns of data that you want to graph. And the reasons that these are highlighted is because, hold on, let me minimize this. If you go over here to labels and time and values, it's telling you, okay, the graphic is looking at column A for the labels, and that will be like what's underneath, you know, the years, and then column B for the numerical values that dictate the size of these bars, right? And you can see they've put other data into this, but column 2, 3, and 4 are not showing up on the graph because they're not activated. Now you can see, I just go in here and put B and C, and then it changes. See, it adds a second column, right? But that's not something that we're going to worry about for today. So I only show you this to say, like, you go in and you look at, okay, how do I recreate this based on what they've done? And then you sort of assemble your data into the format that it needs to be. I highly recommend using Excel or Google Sheets as a starting place for whatever information you're going to put in to Flourish. However, if you don't want to deal with those, I mean, you can come in and directly input your data into these columns. I just don't recommend doing that because it's just a little more clunky and hard to deal with. So we've opened this, and we have this LMPD homicide data that we want to graph. So the first thing we do is hit upload data, and then we go to our spreadsheet where we've saved this data, and we hit open and import. 6 rows were uploaded. Next, select the columns, and Flourish is smart, so it already knows, and especially because I kind of put this in the format that it wanted, you know, which column is the one with the labels and which one is the one with the information that we are graphing.
Chris, can you show us the original sheet so we
Yes,
can
I'm
see
sorry. Yeah. Good idea. So, hang on a second. Right. So this is like as simple. Let me zoom in on this. This is as simple a spreadsheet as you can make. And you notice that I just put this in very simple terms with no, like, I don't have a line up here that says this is LMPD homicides, and I don't have a line down here that says source LMPD. We're going to do all of that, but putting this title and sort of extraneous information into your data, your spreadsheet before you go into Flourish won't help anything because it will just confuse the program as to where the information is. So it's not going to know that it needs to skip over row 1 and go straight to row 2, and it's not going to know that it doesn't need to worry about row 10. So all these things will just make your visualization more complicated. So just try to get the data into its most basic format without any of that stuff, and then we'll add that stuff later on in the process. Okay, so I'm also going to zoom in here just in case. Hope people can see everything okay. Oh, I forgot to say up top, it will tell you untitled visualization. So you just name everything that you're doing, and don't worry until you publish it. Nothing will be publicly available to anyone. So I'll just call this LMP homicides for training. Okay, so you've uploaded the data. And you go over here to preview. It's like, this is what it has so far. And this is pretty good. Like it understood where the information was. You hover over and you get these, informative pop-ups. So we're just gonna do some things to tidy this up a little bit. Over here is where you control all of the things that pop up and kind of dictate the look of the visualization. So the most important thing is to give it a title, right? Because this is not very useful without, what are we looking at here, right? So I go in here and title and say, one thing you always want to do when presenting data is to kind of give people not only an idea of what this information is, but also like what they're supposed to take away from it. So Louisville homicides soar during pandemic, right? Because we're trying to communicate that there was a big jump in homicides in 2020 and 2021. The default headline font on these things, I have always found to be too small. So you go to this styling tab here, turn that on, and you can change a lot about this style. And I just bump it up to the higher font. Then you add a subtitle that says, LMPD saw a surge of homicides in 2020 and 2021. Again, you just put this information in the box and you click off, and then it gives you your subtitle. Now, I always found that it makes the subtitle by default too big. So again, you go into styling and just size it down a little bit. Another thing you want to decide is whether and this will be different for different types of visualizations, but here when you hover over it, it says it gives you the number 186, 173. Well, you can also set those so that those numbers are static on these bars. And the way you do that is in the labels tab, data point labels. So that's going to be the data for each point. And if you just click to show it, then it will show you the data on each point. And then I often like to do that. I think it's easier than looking over here to an axis. But another method of control that you have is, well, since we already have these labeled and we kind of know what the scale of this is, we can go over to the y-axis here and hide it, right? And this is a nice, clean looking graphic. Another thing that it does by default that I don't really love is that it makes these years kind of hard to read and put some sideways to fit more information. So you can control that over here in this X-axis tab. The ticks and labels styling, and set that angle to 0. And I also hate that it defaults to this shaded color. So I'll just go in here and choose like a pure black. I just think that looks better. And again, like you just start playing with this and you can control like a lot more stuff if you want to, you know, for example, I can make these years bigger, right? One thing to be aware of is that how it looks right here could be a little bit different. You know, it will size up or down for mobile or for tablet or depending on the size of the screen and the article that it's going into. So, you know, you don't want to push the boundaries too much because sometimes you can get something that looks really distorted when you're looking at it on a different screen. And by the way, you can kind of preview what different versions of it might look like. Like here's what it would look like on a mobile screen, on a tablet, and then desktop, right? And you can even open that in a new window, although I don't typically do that. Okay. So another important thing to do that I always try to do is add a source line. Where did we get this information? So you just put in the source, and like, let's say the source here was LMPD. So I just put that there and it will pop up down here. If you have a URL, like say this is some PDF or some report or some other data that lives online somewhere, you can put in a link here and it will just make that into a hyperlink so people can go directly to where you got the data from if they want to. There's also this note tab here where if there's any issues with your data, like say, you know, 2022 was only through November and all the other years are full years, you would say, you know, 2022 data only includes 11 months, right? And it'll just put a little bullet and put your note in there. So that is important to do if you need to qualify anything. All right, so there's a couple of other things that we can do that will add to this, but since we've sort of got the basics down in a nice publishable graphic that we can now use and put anywhere, let's go through the process of making it public, publishing it, and putting it on our site. So the first step to that is this export and publish button up here, right? So nothing that you're doing here is actually lives on the web until you do this, right? So you publish to share and embed. If you're working on something that is not, you know, hasn't aired yet, might not air for several days, and that you want to collaborate with people on, you can set a password here for them to open it, so that it's, you know, public on the web, but password protected. But you can't do that once you actually are ready to use this in a story. So I'll go ahead and publish this. And notice it created a link here, which is a nice simple link, not as small as a bit.ly, but you know, a short link that you can then click on. It'll open in a new window and you can send anybody to this window here to view the graphic. But what we want to do is put it inside a story on our site, right? So we're going to use the embed on your website option. And this is a little tricky, but there's a way that we have to do it, which is under this more options. There's 3 different ways to embed, and iframe is what we need. Okay, so you click on iframe and you copy all of this source code. Okay, so we'll go over now to our site. and I've already created a fake web story for this to live in. Okay, so let's say that this is our web story and we want this chart that we made to pop up right here after this line, right? So we're in the web story and we go to this little camera looking insert embed widget thing, open that up and just paste all that source code that you copied out of the Flourish iframe. Just hit insert and then it's done. I put a do not publish on this, but you can see it in the preview. And voila, here is your graphic that will live inside this story. People still hover over it and get the information, so it's interactive, and there you go. I probably went through that extremely fast. So if anybody has any questions before we move on to the little extra things.
Well, I have a question about when we're importing it, if it doesn't come in an Excel sheet, you have to manually type everything in. And my other question is, if it does come in Excel, but sometimes it has more data points than we want, then you just have to work with that, or you just copy and paste certain parts of it. Like you're not importing everything, basically.
Right. So yeah, unless you're just dealing with so to your first question, does it have to be in Excel? I mean, normally it does. If you have just like 5 data points like I do here, you could just manually type that into Flourish and it would be fine. But for the most part, you do want to start with a spreadsheet. And if it's in a PDF or something, like there's various tips and tricks to kind of get it out of there. Like I spent almost an entire day doing that for Grace Haba the other day when LMPD gave her like 90 pages of a PDF, but that's like way beyond the scope of this training. And then I think in your question about like, what if you have more data than you need? So like, there's 2 ways to go about it. Like one way is you can just like make a new Excel sheet and say your data is over here and it's got all these columns. Well, just copy out the columns that you want and not the ones you don't want, put them on this new sheet, save it, and then when you upload it into Flourish, it'll ask you, do you want to get the data from sheet 1 or sheet 2? And you can rename the sheet whatever you want, and you just point it to the correct sheet. And then the other way to potentially control that is, over here on this data tab, when we started this out, like their template data had all of these columns that were not in the graphic. And you simply control that over here by telling it which values to look at. So if there's column C, D, B, it's like all these other columns, as long as you just say, hey, just look at column B, or just look at column D, or look at B, C, and F, which you can do in this box, then it will know which columns to look at, and the other columns will be as if they weren't there. So there's different ways you can kind of go about dealing with those things. But if you ever ran into specific issues, I mean, I could take a look at it and we can kind of tailor it down to the format it needs to go into. Okay, so another thing that I like to do, this is definitely does not have to be done, but I think it looks cool, is to add this little bug here. So again, in the footer where you put the source line, it has this little logo option, which you can enable, and then it will let you upload an image. And I can send all you guys this this little bug here. But I just upload this little WDRB guy from art, and then it puts that in the corner and brands it, which I think is really cool. And there's another thing you might want to do is, like, say the story is focusing on, homicide soared to a record in 2021, right? So you want 2021 to be kind of highlighted or to look different than the other bars in this graphic. And you control that by these colors. And this is actually really frustrating. It's not very intuitive, and it's taken me a while to kind of to figure it out. But there's two different ways to control colors, and you want to, it'll default to making them all the same, which is nice, but you have to go over to by row. And now it's done this thing where it thinks that it needs to make every year a different color. So you go into this palette, you edit the palette, and here's it saying, we have all these colors in our palette, and you just get rid of all the ones except the one that you want to use as the main color. Okay, so now you're saying you can only have gray, right? And then there's this custom overrides part. Again, I know this is all a lot to take in, so I'd be happy to go over this again if you actually want to do this in any specific graphic. But the custom overrides allows you to tell it one specific column to make a different color. So I'm going to say 2021 :red. You click on this little thing here, it kind of explains what you're supposed to do in this box, in these boxes. Click off of it, and then voila, it's red and highlighted. Let's see, another. The plot background is another thing you can do. You can put a color on it. So if you want to offset your data from the title and put a gray background, and you can pick any color to put behind there. Obviously that looks terrible. So there's lots of ways to customize, and you just I've just learned how to do them all just by going through these tabs and just changing things and seeing what happens, basically. And then, you can always just go back and be like, oh, I didn't want to do that. If you make any changes to a graphic that is already published, they will not be reflected in the version that lives online forever unless you export and publish again. You don't have to redo the embed code on the website. Once you put that in there, it will update with any changes that you make, but you do have to export and publish again. So that's pretty much what I wanted to do in a half hour. So I think we did pretty well. And like I said, this is just getting started with this thing. There's just so many things that it can do. So if anybody's interested, we can do another one in the future with a more complicated graphic or a different type, and keep iterating with it. I just hope more people are kind of getting to use it as part of the daily process. So anybody have any questions? Nope.
No question, but thank you for doing this. It's really helpful and informative as I chop onions at my house.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks for dialing in. And like I said, I've been playing with this thing for years now, so I'm happy to be a resource for anybody. If you just want to get started with it and you run into something, just let me know, and we will work through it. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.